Well, Conrad Weaver is the movie's creator, and I was able to visit with him at the film's Oklahoma premiere. So Conrad, why did you decide to do this?
Well, to be honest, 4 years ago, I was following a blog. All Aboard Harvest put out a blog. And I was reading the blog, and it's actually my wife's idea. She was reading it over my shoulder one day, and she said, that would make a great documentary.
And I said, you know what? That's a great idea. And that was 4 years ago, and here we are today with a finished product.
So how many miles did you travel with these custom cutters?
In 2013, when it was the bulk of my time on the road and in the air, I traveled over 100,000 miles. That's not counting in 2011, I did some traveling. 2012, I did a bunch of traveling. So I'm guessing 120, 130,000 miles.
Give our viewers that they're closest they get to wheat is maybe the bread in the grocery store aisle, what it's like to be a custom cutter today.
Well, to be a custom cutter, you have to have a lot of guts because you take a lot of risks. And you're buying a combine that costs $500,000, and most of them buy a new one every year. They basically trade in the old model, buy a new one. They have tractors, they have grain carts, they have semi-trucks, they have campers that they live in. And so in about May, they head south with all their equipment, and they go down to Texas. And they're basically in their RVs and in their campers from May until late September, or even into October as they go into fall crops. But for wheat, they're in there all summer long.
Yeah, I know sometimes here we may have some bad thunderstorms and things are too wet to cut, and then the custom cutters will move on. So it's really a hit or miss kind of proposition, is it not?
That's a huge challenge. In fact, there was one custom cutter, and you'll see it in the film, who was in South Dakota. And they had 15,000 acres of wheat that was in front of them to cut. And they were sitting there for a month. They'd go out every day, and about 2 o'clock they'd get a thunderstorm. And so that just put moisture, on the wheat. And the wheat's got to be dry. It's got to be 13% humidity or less for them to cut. And so they were sitting there for over a month. And that made them anxious because their farmer up in North Dakota was calling saying, hey, my wheat up here is getting pretty ready to cut. And so sometimes they have to move on. Sometimes they're like, you know what, we can't miss this guy up north because, we're sorry, Mr. Farmer, but we're going to have to move on. And so now that farmers are stuck with his wheat sitting, and he has to maybe call another custom cutter to come in and cut that wheat.
Now, you're certainly no neophyte around agriculture, but as I've learned, every time I go out, there's plenty to learn. What did you learn doing this film?
What I learned was the tenacity of the farmers and the people in agriculture is amazing. Unparalleled in my book, that they take these risks knowing that there may not be anything to cut, and yet they do it anyway. And they go back year after year doing the same thing and taking those risks.
So watching this is truly not just an agriculture story, but a people story as well.
Absolutely. I started out thinking beautiful scenery, big equipment, all that fun stuff, which is great, and it's in the film. But to make a good story, it's about the people. And that's what I really fell in love with. I fell in love with the people. And I made some of my best friends. In fact, one of them here a couple weeks ago, she called me and she was like, when are we going to get to see you again? What excuse are we going to have for you to come out to see us again? And that's true. I made some of my best friends now are on harvest or out here in the Midwest. And so it really, truly is a people story.
Yeah, and some of the visuals are absolutely stunning. Did you have a favorite place that you got to shoot in?
I think my favorite place of all was when I was in Montana. There's a place there that is way back in the middle of nowhere. There's a field that you have to drive 15 miles out of town down this dirt lane to get to it. And it's overlooking the Judith River Basin. And there's a wheat field right on the edge, and it drops down over 1,000 feet down to the river. And I sat there for 2 hours one day by myself while the wheat harvesters were going back to get some more equipment. And I was out there by myself, not a sound to be heard except the wind rustling in the wheat and in the trees. Amazing place, and you'll see that place in the film.
So what do you want someone that sees this film, what's the takeaway? What do you want them to think about?
I want them to say what a friend of mine said after he saw the film. This gentleman lives in the city. He hasn't been on a farm. He doesn't know much about agriculture at all. He came away and said, Conrad, he said, the next time I buy a loaf of bread, I will know a little better where this loaf of bread came from and how it got to this shelf. And that's exactly the reaction I want people to understand and to get out of this film. I want them to walk away saying, wow, there's a lot that goes into the food that I put on my table. And there's a lot of people who take risks to provide this food for me.
Well, Conrad, a great piece of work, something that everyone should see. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, while Oklahoma farmers may well be harvesting less this year, some will still be donating part of this year's crop to buy books for schools. The Oklahoma Farm Bureau is sponsoring a program called Bushels for Books, which allows farmers to donate a few bushels from their wheat harvest to purchase bushel baskets of agricultural-based books to be placed in Oklahoma schools. Starting in August, the teachers will be given an opportunity to apply for these new textbooks.